My name is Rebecca Lammers. I'm the Democrats Abroad Global Chair for the Taxation Task Force, and I live in London. The Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force and the States Committee are co-hosting this event today. There are many of you that are from Manhattan here, and this event is focused on the New York 12th District. And the New York 12th District is a very special place for many reasons. First, it's because it's the district where we have the most Democrats voting from abroad. Secondly, due to redistricting, we have an unprecedented race where the upper and the west sides of Manhattan have been combined into the same district for the first time since World War II. This is the most competitive midterm Democratic primary, not only this year, but that we've seen in a very, very long time. The main mission of Democrats Abroad, just to give you guys some background info, is to elect Democrats and to mobilize the overseas vote. In our survey of just under 7,000 Americans abroad in April this year, we asked people why they didn't vote. And the number one answer was that they thought their vote didn't matter. I just want to clarify to everyone here that every vote from abroad matters, because time and time again, it's the votes from abroad that have made the difference in made the difference. And for example, in 2020, it was our votes that were the margin of victory to help elect Biden in Arizona and Georgia. So we need more people to vote this midterm election year, more than any other year. And I'll tell you why. We have some really hard races to keep the House and Senate this year, because if we don't keep the majority in Congress, it's going to make it much harder to fight off Trump in 2024. American democracy is at risk. So to anyone that's listening, whether you vote in Manhattan, in New York State, or anywhere else in the US, please go to votefromabroad.org to register to vote today. It only takes a few minutes, and we have a great team of volunteers that are at the ready to help you register and request your ballot. This event is specifically dedicated for Americans abroad to meet candidates that will appear on your Democratic primary ballot. And for New Yorkers that signed up to receive an emailed ballot already, your ballot is going to hit your inbox starting this Saturday, July 9th. Hopefully you didn't sign up for a mailed ballot, but if you did, the ballot is going to be mailed this Saturday, and you'll receive it in the mail however long it takes to reach your country. If you remember one thing today, please let it be this: mail back your ballot the same day you receive it. We have seen ballots not counted so far this year due to slow mail delivery and arriving after the deadline. So please don't let your vote go uncounted. Return it as soon as humanly possible.
He currently represents the New York 10th District, which is the west side of Manhattan, and he currently represents the second largest concentration of Democrats living abroad. As the current chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry has been a relentless defender of our country's democracy and our Constitution's fundamental promise of equality for all, and has proudly stood on the front lines in the fight for LGBTQ rights, women's rights, racial justice, and the First Amendment rights guaranteeing freedom of expression and religion. Since his election in 1992, he's been considered a stalwart advocate for civil rights and civil liberties, a key voice on transportation issues, an ardent supporter of a secure and democratic Israel, and a nationally recognized champion of progressive causes that advance economic and social justice in order to protect the most vulnerable among us. Congressman Nadler has created one of the most ambitious legislative agendas ever before the House Judiciary Committee, overseeing the passage of bills to strengthen our gun laws, reform our criminal justice system, protect the right to vote and access to the ballot box, ensure equal anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ individuals, create a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, enforce arbitration for workers, and lower prescription drug costs, among many other accomplishments, all the while carrying out a robust oversight agenda aimed at holding the Trump administration accountable for threats to our democracy and Constitution.
Hello. Yes, let me spotlight you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Let me just, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I know I'm speaking to a lot of people across many different time zones, so thank you for being here and giving me a chance to speak. let me say that the work your organization does is truly vital. You connect, that's better. The work your organization does is truly vital. You connect so many Democrats scattered around the world. You offer them a voice, and you advocate powerfully for the priorities that are important to you. The weight and efficacy of that advocacy cannot be understated. Now, you probably know a few things about me. I impeached Trump twice. I've led the fight to protect our kids from gun violence. I've worked tirelessly over the years to defend abortion rights and unstack an extremist Supreme Court that is taking away Americans' fundamental rights. Now more than ever, that work must continue unabated. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I've been hard at work on some of the issues most important to our country right now. I've led efforts to pass the Equality Act, which would ban discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexuality. I've overseen investigations to preserve competition in our free markets, and I fought tirelessly to make sure something like the Muslim ban could never be enacted again. I'm also very proud of the work I've done to improve New York City. Whenever your members return to New York from abroad, I hope they see the evidence of my hard work in our greener parks, better transit networks, and prosperous small businesses. That's my opening statement. I'm certainly open to questions for as long as you want.
I'd like to introduce Leah Wallach now. Leah, would you be able to take it away?
Yes, I would. First of all, thank you, Congressman Nadler, for your opening statement. I'd now like to introduce Danny Ryan, who's a small business owner and a New York 12 voter, also living in London. And Danny has a question on small American businesses abroad and international competitiveness. Do you want to go ahead, Danny?
Sure. Hold on 1 second. Make some technical issues here. Sorry. Apologies. Hi. My name's Danny Ryan. I run a small business over here. I've lived in London for since the 80s, actually, but lived in New York. Lived in Manhattan when I last lived there on East 7th Street. I got hit by the transition tax and also by the guilty taxes, which have made my company less competitive compared to some of the domestic, some other companies.
What was the second one you said? The guilty tax?
Yeah, guilty.
Okay, fine.
Transition tax as well.
Yeah.
Now, bearing in mind that I haven't lived in America for many, many years, and I think part of the problem that a lot of small business owners living abroad who are Americans have is the insecurity of also not knowing how things might change and how unintended consequences can happen from some of this legislation. It feels that there's nobody really looking out for us. And I was wondering whether Congressman would be supporting the small business exclusions from these types of taxes.
Yes, I certainly support an exemption for small business. I strongly support an exemption for small American business owners from the double taxation of the guilty tax, and also from relief from the repatriation tax. I don't think small business owners should ever be subject to double taxation. And I've asked my staff to look into legislation that would create an exemption. I'm also a co-sponsor of legislation that would simplify the tax code for foreign earned income, because it's much too complicated now.
Thank you very much. That'd be really appreciated.
And thank you to Danny for your question. I'd like to ask a question now, Congressman Nadler. If you're elected to the New York 12th District, you'll very likely be representing the largest number of Americans abroad of any member of Congress or the House. Given this, how will you demonstrate leadership on American abroad issues?
Well, first of all, I'm proud to already be a member of the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus. Secondly, you sponsor legislation such as I was just talking about. There are a lot of other bills. There are a lot of other provisions. Medicare portability is one of them. Residency-based taxation is another one. And I think you have to keep Americans abroad in mind when passing all legislation to make sure that you have no unintended consequences, which that negatively impact Americans living outside the US, which we've seen on a lot of legislation. So as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I'm uniquely positioned to advocate for the advancement of legislation regarding Americans abroad. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of much of the legislation, and I think I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Congressman. We're now going to go to the audience Q&A. Rebecca, who is the first person we have for questions from the floor?
Well, we did get a question asking why Representative Nadler is not a member of the Americans Abroad Caucus, but he just confirmed that he is. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from actually Democrats Abroad Vice Chair Art Shankler. Art, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks very much, Congressman Nadler, for joining us. We met very briefly at Henry's Restaurant one night on 105th, so it's a pleasure to see you again, although albeit at a greater distance. My question is about gun control. As we all know, the Supreme Court recently ruled that the concealed carry regulations in New York were not constitutional. The governor just signed legislation to make it conform with the legislation. What else can Congress do to address the outbreak of gun violence that continues to plague the country? And I would say from Americans abroad perspective, many of us live in countries where there are obviously much stricter gun control laws in place. So we look on aghast, I guess. Go ahead, sorry.
You should look on aghast. I look on aghast. We have had, the problem we have right now is the Senate. We have passed very, very strong gun control legislation. As chairman of the Judiciary, I've led the way on this. We passed just I think 7 or 8 weeks ago, we passed the Protect Our Kids Act, which is an amalgamation of 7 different pieces of legislation, and a mandatory red flag law. What passed the Senate was a pale limitation of this. It gave some money for mental health, which is a good idea. And it encouraged states to have red flag laws. It didn't mandate it. Our legislation went much further. It banned magazines of more than 15 rounds, banned bump stocks. It mandated a federal red flag law. It said that nobody under the age of 21 can be licensed to buy a gun. And it did a number of other things. I would like to go further and reinstate the 1994 to 2004 assault weapons ban totally. I don't see why anybody other than the military should have assault weapons or weapons of war in effect. And in fact, I think what we really ought to do is what they did in Australia, which was to ban, after they had a mass shooting a number of years ago, one mass shooting, not 200 such as we've had so far this year. They banned the possession of anything other than handguns and rifles that could be used for hunting. They mandated that everybody who owned one sell it back to the government. That's what we really ought to do. Now, as a practical matter, we'll never get, with the current composition of the Senate, we're not going to get it back. We're going to get that with more Democratic senators. And if we had a slightly bigger majority in the House, because we had to whittle down what we passed in the House, we couldn't do the assault weapons ban, which we wanted to do because we couldn't get the votes among the Democrats. We only have a margin of 4. But if we have a larger Democratic margin and at least 2 more Democratic senators so we can get around the filibuster, we can do all of this.
Thank you. Let's hope so.
Thank you, Art. Our next question is from Bruce Murray. Bruce, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Congressman Nadler, thank you very much for your great experience as a congressman in the US House, and specifically for your work on the impeachment trials. If reelected in 2022, you know, our plate is so full of unfinished business. I want to focus on climate change and thinking about trying to increase our majority in the House and add a few senators. If we somehow manage to do that, what will you do to help accelerate climate change mitigation so that we have a future we all can believe in?
Well, I'm an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, which would do a lot to go to totally electric vehicles to stop the use of fossil fuels, which put carbon into the atmosphere. And that's what we have to pass. We don't have the votes to pass that now, but if we pass the Green New Deal, then that would go a very long way towards solving the American part of the problem. And then, of course, we have to urge other countries to do the same thing. Right now, we're a laggard compared to other countries. You know, the Intergovernmental Climate Committee, or whatever it is, has targets for every country, and very few countries are meeting it, but we're way behind the curve. And the Supreme Court has just thrown a real curveball. This Supreme Court, which was packed by Trump and McConnell, as you know, by them denying Merrick Garland even a hearing on the grounds that, after all, it's a year away. The next president should pick a Supreme Court justice, and then rushing Amy Coney Barrett through just days before the election. Besides being total hypocrisy, that effectively packed the court and gave us a 6-3 majority, and that majority is likely to not only on choice, you know, it should overturn Roe v. Wade, but it's likely to do a lot of other damage in a lot of other ways, including the climate. You just saw a Supreme Court decision a few days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, actually, on the climate, which hamstrings Congress. So I foresaw this about a year ago, and Senator Markey of Massachusetts, Ed Markey, and I introduced legislation to counterpack the Supreme Court, to add 4 new members. That was considered very radical at the time. It's somewhat considered less radical now, that the president hasn't come around yet. But if the Supreme Court is as bad in the next year as I'm afraid it will be, then I think most people will come around, and that is the solution.
Congressman Nadler, for a country that wants to be a beacon on a hill, we need you to be a strong speaker so that we are not laggards, but can really lead the way. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I totally agree.
Great, thank you, Bruce. We have a few questions that were submitted by people who were not able to attend at this time. The first one is from Pamela Combostet, and her question is on financial exclusion, which is notably a problem for retirement accounts, and long-term savings is a major problem for expats. Why does the House version of the Secure Act do so little to encourage expats' access to such accounts? What improvements to strengthen expats' access to retirement accounts and savings vehicles can be made when the House and Senate versions of the bill are reconciled?
Well, I can't go into detail on that right now, but the fact is that, as far as I'm concerned, Americans abroad should be able to use foreign banks exactly as Americans here use American banks. The legislative problems that stop this ought to be repealed. For example, the reporting threshold of foreign banks has not been adjusted for inflation since the early 1970s. We ought to have an exemption for American business owners from the double taxation of the guilty tax and relief from the repatriation tax. I think those would go a long way to solve the problems you're talking about.
Okay, great, thank you. The other question is from Jax Jacobson. And the question is, what are the Democrats planning to do to address the loss of abortion healthcare services before the November election? What is the party doing to ensure that women and girls can access this necessary service now as opposed to in November?
Well, the honest answer is not much because we don't have the votes. We passed, I introduced 10 years ago, the Freedom of Choice Act, which is called FOCA, and it was renamed the Women's Health Act. It passed the House on pretty much a party line vote a couple months ago, but it hasn't passed the Senate because we don't have the votes in the Senate. And that's just the fact of the matter. It's not going to pass. The Republicans are, to a person, opposed to this. I'm very upset about this, obviously. But again, until we get the votes, there's not much we can do. We've done what we can in the House. We've passed the Women's Health Act. And I'm just as upset about this as you are. You know, I've been in the abortion fight. I hate to date myself, but since 1970, when I lobbied in the New York legislature to pass a bill legalizing abortion, which it did by one vote in 1970. This Roe v. Wade by 3 years. So I've been involved in this fight for a long time, and where it's come to now, I'm really very upset about. And we'll do what we can. What we can do, we've done, as I said, we've done what we can in the House. We passed the Women's Health Act. We've passed some version of it every year for the last few years. We just haven't had the votes to overcome the filibuster. Now, you take someone like Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, they're all in favor of abortion rights, but they're not in favor of suspending the filibuster. So as a practical matter, they block it. We hold the House and get 2 more Democratic senators who are willing to overturn the filibuster, then we can pass this. Let me say one other thing. I am afraid, people haven't talked about this very much, but I'm afraid of where the Supreme Court may go next. I mean, you already see the anti-abortion zealots saying that we ought to have a national ban on abortion. Congress should pass a national ban on abortion. And if the Republicans, God forbid, take control of both houses, and if they had the presidency, it can't happen until at least after the next presidential election, they'll pass a national ban. But before that, the Supreme Court has said in its decision, in the Dobbs case, it said, in effect, that a fetus is a person from the point of conception. Well, if the fetus is a person from the point of conception, the 14th Amendment says you can't deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So if fetus is a person, I am very much afraid that this Supreme Court is, in the not too distant future, going to rule that any law permitting any abortion whatsoever is unconstitutional. And that would take a constitutional amendment to override. That's another reason why I think it's going to become more and more evident that we have to increase the size of the Supreme Court, because this court is just dangerous.
I wonder if Lisette Wright, are you here?
Am I here? Yes.
No, Lisette, who's
Yes,
submitted a
I
question.
am, Rebecca.
Okay,
I'm
go
here.
ahead.
Okay, hello, Congressman Nadler. It's great to see you. I'm actually an Upper West Sider and did run into you many times in the subway. And thank you so much for everything you do. I have a question from Democrats Abroad Global Disability Caucus. If you are reelected to represent your district, what is your plan to strengthen the Americans with Disability Act and to reinforce the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act?
Well, let me be very honest. I haven't heard many suggestions that that there are problems with the American Disability Act, the Americans with Disability Act, with the ADA. If there are, I'd like to hear them, and we'll see what we can do about them. I think the ADA is a very good bill. I was one of the co-sponsors of it back in 1990, and in fact, I introduced a bill based on it called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, because as you know, pregnant women can't do the same things physically that they could do when they weren't pregnant. They can't lift heavy objects. They may need to sit more. They may need to go to the bathroom more. And employers are under no obligation to meet those needs. So I introduced years ago the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which is modeled exactly on the ADA, and says that an employer must provide a reasonable accommodation to the needs of a pregnant woman, provided it's not an undue burden on the employer. And the meaning of those phrases, what's a reasonable accommodation, what's an undue burden? We have 30 years of interpretation by the courts, because that's what the ADA says. As I said, I have not heard criticisms that the ADA is inadequate. If there are, I'd like to hear them, and we'll see what we can do about them.
Thank you so much. I was actually focusing more on the threat that the GOP might just deregulate or remove certain protections for people with disabilities.
Well, that's one thing they cannot do under the ADA, because the ADA lays, like I said, it does, and there are 30 years of judicial interpretation. They can't go against those 30 years of judicial interpretation unless the Supreme Court wants to change that. We see no indication of that in this case, but with this court, who knows?
Thank you so much. Are you, I just have another quick question. Are you open for the Global Disabilities Caucus to write to you if we have additional follow-up questions?
Of course, right? Well, whatever.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Great. That is all the time that we have for questions for Congressman Nadler. Thank you again so much for your time and for taking the time out to speak to Democrats abroad. Please keep letting New Yorkers abroad know the importance of their vote. It's super, super important, especially this year. Well,
Thank you again for having me. I always appreciate the chance to speak to Democrats, whether they're in New York City or halfway across the world. I'm especially grateful for a chance to share the work that I've been doing and hope to continue to do. Let me just say I'm running for re-election because I think my voice is more needed than ever, whether it's protecting reproductive rights or taking on the NRA or enshrining LGBTQ rights into law. I'm running because principled progressive leadership has never been rarer or more urgently needed than now. You know my record in Congress. You know how much there is to do to protect the vision of America we all imagine. I hope you'll agree that my voice is the strongest one to turn that vision into reality. I hope I can count on your support on August 23rd. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I hope you have a great rest of the day or night, as the case may be.
Thank you. And just a reminder that expats are encouraged to send their ballots back as soon as they get their ballot on July 9th, which is this Saturday. They'll get their emailed ballot. So they need to send it back as soon as possible because of all the different kind of mail deliveries from COVID. So the sooner the better, so that every vote is counted. All right. I'm going to introduce our next candidate. Our next candidate is Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who I can see is now on the call. Carolyn Maloney has represented the New York 12th District since 2013. Throughout her career, she has used her voice and position to shine a spotlight on the most important issues of our time, from getting arrested while protesting apartheid as a city councilwoman to demanding all women and girls globally receive true equality and opportunity, to gun control, to demanding accountability for repairs for NYCHA residents and keeping the Equal Rights Amendment alive. In 2007, Congresswoman Maloney co-founded the bipartisan Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus in the House of Representatives. As the unofficial representative of Americans Abroad, she has introduced legislation to help resolve the problems that Americans abroad experience on issues such as voting rights, financial access, and has introduced a bill to establish a commission on Americans abroad. She is a strong advocate for Americans abroad in Congress, leading the charge on our issues. She has made her mark on Washington by standing on her strong and consistent record. Time magazine has called her a tenacious, resilient legislator, and even the New York Post hailed her as one of New York City's hardest working lawmakers. Today, Carolyn's position as a hard-hitting progressive leader is indisputable. She has shown a talent for fostering lasting bipartisan agreement in an increasingly polarized government without giving up the ideas and causes she's fought for throughout her career, promoting equality, protecting consumers, building infrastructure that serves New Yorkers and the region, extending and protecting healthcare coverage for all, protecting the environment, and working to understand and find solutions for everyday issues like affordable housing and small business support. Congresswoman, if you're here, I'm very happy to hand it over to you for a 10-minute introduction.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's wonderful to be here with so many Americans that are living abroad. I don't think I've been able to address so many different people at the same time in different countries. And for those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Carolyn Maloney. I'm a mother, a former educator, and running for re-election in the New York 12. During the 110th Congress, I co-founded the Americans Abroad Caucus and have relaunched the caucus ever since. I had heard from so many of my constituents about the issues they were having abroad with being American and living overseas, with voting, with taxation, with financial institutions, and I wanted to try to solve their problems. Millions of Americans live overseas, including military personnel and civilians, and continue to vote and pay taxes while living overseas. I would say that all of you are ambassadors for our country, you're citizens of our country, and you should have the same rights and protections that you have here at home. By creating this caucus, my goal was to ensure that Americans who live overseas have an outlet for discussing issues that are important to Americans who live overseas, including access to the ballot, taxation issues, participation in the census, and more. I have had several hearings on Americans living abroad, the issues that they have, and I'm a strong and persistent and consistent advocate for your concerns. I do also, I must share, represent the United Nations. So I do represent a large number of ambassadors in the international community, and a large part of my constituency lives abroad. It's not unusual for me to walk down the street and have someone come up and start talking to me about the issues of Americans abroad. So I want to thank you for putting this together. I have also always gone to meet with you in the Democratic caucuses. I always have a session when we have the Democratic caucuses at the convention. We didn't have it the last time because of COVID, but it's good to be together again, even though it is remote. So I yield back my time and open it up for discussion. And thank you again for taking this initiative and for including me in it. Thank you. I yield back, as we say in Congress.
I'm going to hand it over to one of your constituents in Germany. I'm going to introduce Luca. Luca, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Rebecca.
Go
Good
ahead.
afternoon, Congresswoman Maloney. So, as a majority of Americans abroad, are working and middle class, but are subject to excessive complex filing requirements and tax treatment more punitive than if we lived in the US. So we suffer from unfair and outdated stereotypes that we are moving abroad to evade paying US taxes, when research confirms that at the end, most Americans move abroad to marry a non-US spouse or for work. The question is, would you support adjustments to the tax code that align tax residency with physical residency, provided, of course, that they are resilient against abuse and are beneficial to the Internal Revenue Service? So such change is commonly known and used in the rest of the world as residency-based taxation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. I fully support realigning the tax code to make it more fair and equitable for American citizens living abroad. And that is why I created the American Abroad Caucus over 10 years ago and have led this caucus in every Congress since. My bill, the Overseas Americans Financial Access Act, modifies tax reporting requirements that make it hard for Americans abroad to open bank accounts and conduct business with banks in their country of residence. I am also a co-leader on another caucus priority bill, which was authored by Congressman Byers. It's called the Tax Simplification Act, which simplifies tax filing for citizens abroad and expands the definition of the foreign earned income exclusion. My district has one of the highest numbers of American citizens living abroad in the country, and a district with one of the most vibrant, diverse, and multilingual populations in Congress. The issue of residency-based taxation hits close to home, whether that home is here or across borders. But this issue affects all districts here in Congress, and as the world becomes more global, this issue is only going to become more prominent. We are proud to have expanded the Americans Abroad Caucus, welcoming in new members and having additional new members join us on our leading and working on our legislation. Together, the work we're doing in these spaces is generating results. I am so proud to have built a bipartisan community within Congress that is supportive of this effort. Our caucus co-chairs are Representative Dina Titus of Nevada and Representative Maria Elvira Salazar of Florida. And we have recently welcomed several new members to the caucus and on our other leading bills.
Okay, thank you, Luca, for the question. I'm now going to hand it over to Arif, who is also a New York 12 voter living in Germany. Arif, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I am here.
So nice. That's such a nice touch to have our constituents there to talk to us. It's really, really very thoughtful of you.
Yeah, I didn't want to miss this. It's historic. Hello, Congresswoman Maloney. First, both as a Democrats Abroad member and as a New York 12 voter, let me thank you for your continuing support of Americans abroad. I am a U.S. taxpayer and an international tax advisor, so I experience firsthand the difficulties of complying with both U.S. tax law and the law in our country of residence. Frankly, we are frustrated that our tax and especially our financial access issues are getting worse, not better. Assuming you are reelected, what are your legislative plans in the next term to help us resolve issues that Americans abroad face? Thank you.
Thank you. I will tell you that I introduced the Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act to accomplish this very thing. This commission would be bipartisan, and its goal would be to study the full impact of federal policies and the actions of our governmental agencies on Americans abroad. In addition to introducing the commission, I periodically conduct meetings with constituents who live abroad and advocacy groups to keep engaged with issues that my constituents face who are living abroad. I also meet with Americans living abroad when they come to my office. Many people that when they come to Washington, they come to see me, even whether they're in my district or not, to discuss the issues. I recently held an information session on current and potential new caucus members, and it had several members in attendance, including Representative Ming, from our city delegation. And it's great to get together with colleagues and hear from citizens abroad and work with them to promote this issue and its importance. I would say to you that if I am reelected, I will have a hearing. We have written, as many of you know, we have written Treasury several times on the problems that you confront. And they really don't answer it. They don't really answer the problem. So the one way to do it, and it's a lot of hard work, but and I've had hearings, particularly on the voting issues, and we got those straightened out somewhat. But on the tax issues, there is really problematic. I mean, I have talked to people that have literally divorced their spouses to get out of the problems of it. And I want you to know that it came about because of 9/11, which was a terrible attack on America. And they wanted to crack down on banking and crack down on tracking money. And I think they've gone a little bit overboard, quite frankly. But I think the only way to really get answers is to have the Treasury have to come in for a formal examination on this. I want to compliment you on what you are doing today, because what you're doing is extremely important, reaching out to your elected officials on your concerns and telling them about it. And it's very effective to have people that we represent, that it's our responsibility to work for you. And you've had two of my constituents address me today, and I want to thank you for that. But as the caucus chair, I am hoping that you're doing this in every single congressional district across the country, letting them know who you are, letting them know your issues, letting them know about the caucus. And fundamentally, what you need in passing legislation is numbers. It's like an election. You get 215 votes, you can pass the House. Once it gets out of the House, you have a good, if it's bipartisan, you have a good chance of getting it through the Senate. But a lot of our bills, even though they affect millions of people, because the number of people living and working abroad continues to grow every year, they don't react to it. I had a hard time getting co-chairs to even help me with the caucus. So I think you have to reach out, let them know who you are, and ask them to join the caucus, ask them to come up with their own legislative ideas or join other legislative ideas. And it's a matter of getting the votes. Now, earlier, I had a meeting on some of these issues with, I don't see the same faces on this meeting as I saw in the last one, but it was a discussion on some of these issues. And I told them that I need help. You have to go to your elected officials and ask them to co-sponsor these bills and ask them to support the commission bill, the tax simplification bill, and only being taxed in one area bill, and all of these other bills that we have. But I think the thing that I could do the most is hold a hearing on the issues to put a highlight on it, and to continue to advocate and lobby you to do more of what you're doing right now, letting people know your issues, asking for their support, and really supporting candidates that support you.
Okay, thank you. And we would very definitely appreciate such a hearing.
Thank you, Arif. I'm going to go to Bruce Murray. Bruce, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Representative Maloney, thank you for your years of work in Congress. I am the chair of our Global Progressive Democrats Abroad Caucus, but right now I'm going to switch hats a little bit and speak for our Reparations Task Force. And they are part of a coalition of over 300 organizations who are working day and night to ensure that we pass H.R. 40, the reparations bill that would establish a commission to study the issue. And the bean counters say that we have enough votes in the House to pass the bill, but nevertheless, our leaders, Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn, are not bringing it to the floor for a vote. We're trying to figure out what we can do to get it to the floor for a vote. And I would like to ask you if you have suggestions for us.
Okay, who is Barbara Lee, the head of this bill? Who's the lead sponsor on the bill? Do you know? Of HR 40?
There are some of them. The one that comes to mind is Sheila Jackson from Texas right now.
I would suggest, and I'll talk to Sheila when I get back to Congress. She's a friend of mine. We have a procedure called a motion to discharge. And you create she can initiate that as the chief sponsor, and you get signatures on it. And if you get enough signatures, then it forces the bill to the floor for a vote. That's one way to do it. Another way is for her to push for whatever committee has jurisdiction to have hearings on it, to raise the profile for it. And it's in judiciary. So it's in Gerald Nadler's committee. So you could suggest that maybe he should have a hearing on that bill if it's in judiciary. And it's hard. I tell you, I passed a lot of bills. I'm almost uniformly rated either first, second, or third most effective member of Congress by 2 independent rating agencies that are based just on your body of work. And it's people think that we're there popping these bills out. It's very hard to pass a bill. It takes a lot of hard work. We did pass some very important reform bills on voting, as some of you may know, to simplify it, to ease your access and give you enough time to vote abroad, which was important. But now these taxation issues are very, very important, and we need to address them. So it takes a lot of work, and as you have to get what I call that fragile flower of consensus. I always try to work in a bipartisan way, because if it passes just with the Democrats, then the Republicans will overturn it or do an executive order against it. You have to make it bipartisan, which is more difficult, but then you get permanent law that way. So my advice is, I don't know if the reparations bill is bipartisan. Do you know? Is it?
It is not, but in the Democratic caucus alone, the support is so strong.
Yeah, that's true. But you got to think long term. It's not just the House. You got to get it through the Senate. And they've got the filibuster there. And so when I'm doing my bills, like the bills that I have in, they're all bipartisan that I mentioned to you with the reforms for the Americans abroad. You have to get, you got to find one Republican that believes in reparations. It just makes it easier to build support. You've got to be thinking, how do you get it through the Senate? But those are some ideas. It's almost a numbers game. You get the numbers of votes that you need, and then you can pass it. And you need a strategy to get through the Senate, because what does it get you if you get it through the House and it dies in the Senate? You want the bill to pass. So I just give you those recommendations, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of work. I had one bill that I worked 18 years on, if you can believe it. It was giving health care to the 9/11 heroes and responders. They weren't being treated fairly. It was, to me, became a mission of love, and I worked on it so hard. I finally got it passed, but it took a lot of hard work, and I finally passed it because I got practically every member of the United States Congress to co-sponsor it. But that took meetings in their office and lobbying them and getting people in their community to speak to them. So it can be done, but it has a lot of work. And we have several important bills that we need to pass that pertain to Americans living abroad too.
Representative Maloney, thank you very much. Black Americans have been working on this for 2 centuries, and we think the time is now.
Well, I think the time is now. I'm a co-sponsor. And to just talk about the time is now, I managed on the floor and moved out of the committee the Juneteenth bill, which made the liberation of slaves a national holiday. And when I went to the floor, to my surprise, really, some Republicans voted against it. I'm saying, what, do you believe in slavery? Why are you voting against celebrating the end of slavery in our country? And so I'm very proud of having been supported, and I'm endorsed by the Black Caucus and worked on many things. And as I said, the bill is in judiciary. Get it moved out of judiciary. You just had the chairman on.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for your question. I'm going to go to a New York 12 voter in Canada. Oh, I have Lizette. Lizette, are you there?
Yes, I am actually. And
Go
thank
ahead.
you, Rebecca. And welcome, Congresswoman Maloney. We met in 2017 when Democrats Abroad had its annual general meeting. So it was lovely to have met you. And thank you so much for everything that you do and continue to do for Democrats Abroad and all Americans abroad. I'm going to call my colleague and from the Global Disability Caucus to ask the question. And so Alyssa, go ahead, please.
Hello, Congressman Maloney. My name is Alyssa. I am a native from New York. I'm in Suffolk County, so I am a member of New York State. And so I'm very excited to be able to ask you this question today on behalf of the Global Disability Caucus. If you are reelected to represent New York 12th Congressional District, what is your plan to strengthen the American Disabilities Act and to reinforce the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act?
Well, I am a member. I've been endorsed by the 504 Club. That's the Americans with Disabilities lobbying. It's an organization solely to advance the rights of Americans with disabilities. I'm a member of the club. I was in a terrible automobile accident that crushed my right leg once. So I have a disability with my right leg. But it's something that we have to always work on. And I think the best way to strengthen it is to always police what is happening. And part of what we do in the club is we go out and find what subway stations are not ADA compliant. And then we work to make them ADA compliant. I'm proud to say that I have worked to get in the east side of my district curb cuts for wheelchairs throughout my district. That was a request from the ADA organization, and I've worked on making that happen. I'm very proud of that we don't have that throughout all the city, but because of independent and governmental appropriations that I got to do that, it is now ADA accessible for wheelchairs, all my sidewalks. And most of my subway stations are ADA compliant. We also have to look at ways to strengthen coverage for ADA compliant. And I have worked on a bill that I have introduced on eyesight. And we have many things that are supported by the federal government with the Medicaid, Medicare program that assist, whether it's a wheelchair or whatever, but nothing for sight. And so I put in, and sight is so important, and so many older people have a problem with sight. And we have some sightseeing machines and things that make it easier to see in America. And I have put in a bill that that should be expanded and covered with other services that are covered under ADA. So that is an initiative that I authored, which is before Congress, that I'm trying to pass. I think another thing is joining organizations and speaking out. We just had a celebration of the ADA anniversary of the bill passing, a press conference. We try to get together and speak out and raise awareness. If anybody is discriminated against or hurt, we try to have a press conference, not just write a letter, but raise the awareness of the public that there are ADA rights and responsibilities, and that anytime we see an injustice, we try to speak out in the club. As I said, I've been endorsed by the 504 Club. I would recommend that you reach out to them, and you can go to their website. It's the 504, I guess probably democraticclub.com. I don't know what it is, but Michael Schweinsberg is the head of it. And I think he would be more informed and better able to answer your questions and talk about other ways to strengthen it. And he's very good at calling us and raising awareness whenever there's a celebration or an anniversary or whatever, to bring light and attention to the challenges we still confront.
Thank you so much.
You are the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Isn't somebody going to ask me about choice? Can I answer that one?
Yeah, one person who wasn't able to make it. I can, their name is Jax Jacobson. They wanted to know, what are the Democrats planning to do to address the loss of abortion healthcare services before the November elections? And what is the party doing to ensure that women and girls can access this necessary service now as opposed to in November?
Well, thank you. America is outraged. We're outraged at this decision that they've, ever since I've been in Congress, they've tried to chip away at a woman's right to choose. Well, with this decision, they are bulldozing our rights into the ground. The ramifications are almost beyond belief, and we are united. We are determined to overturn it and to help in any way. One of the things that we've done in New York State under the leadership of our governor, Kathy Hochul, who you might want to have an audience with, she came out with a bill of all kinds of ways to protect doctors, and even created a fund of $35 million to help bring people in the red states that have been denied an abortion. There was a story about a 13-year-old girl in Ohio already through incest became pregnant, and she didn't know about it, and so missed the deadline of the 6 weeks in Ohio. And so she has to leave to go to another state to achieve an abortion. So we are, what New York, where I am, is called a sanctuary state. So we're doing everything to be helpful to our sisters and families across the country, to be helpful in that regard. One of the things that we have to do, we have to get out and vote people who are pro-choice in. I will share with you that when I first got elected, it was on the day of the so-called Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision, which came out and put restrictions on Roe and made it harder to get Roe. We were very upset about it. I was there with two of the greats, Bella Abzug and Geraldine Ferrara. They went out slinging, attacking the Bush administration. And I went out and I announced for Congress. Because in our country, if you don't like something, you can support a candidate who's working for what you want, or you can get out there and run yourself. I never expected to be elected. I ran against a 14-year incumbent Republican who outspit me 4-1, and I beat him and came off to Congress, and then went to the, I can tell you so many stories on choice, but just briefly, when I became chair of the committee, my first hearing was on access to abortion in Missouri, which is one of these states that has banned abortions now. And the abortion providers were talking about how impossible it is to get through all of the access requirements that they have. So I believe that access, there is no abortion services or no right if there isn't access. And also I would say there's no democracy in this country if women cannot make decisions about their own health care and their bodies, including reproductive health care. So thinking ahead, these justices are already, Justice Thomas said, well, we're going to look, now that we roll back privacy for Roe, we're going to look at access to birth control. We're going to look at gay marriage. We're going to look at some of these advances that we've made, and they are going to try to overturn them. So in anticipation of it, I have introduced a bill called the Access to Birth Control Act. And what this says in the Affordable Care Act, it says that abortion, it says that birth control pills must be covered by your healthcare plan. And some people, even in our own state, are denying it for, quote, religious reasons. The bill says that it's the law of the land. They either have to provide it or go on the internet and help you get it, or they have to refer you to another pharmacy that will provide you with it. Another thing that I've worked with is mifepristone. This is the abortion pill. People really don't realize that 60% of the abortions now in America come from the mifepristone pill. And one of the things I've done as chair is done a number of letters to FDA trying to eliminate, we've eliminated a lot of the hoops and jumps that they have to go through to get mifepristone. We have also secured a guarantee that the states cannot cut off the mail and access through mail for mifepristone. So this is a fight that is worth having. It's a fight that we've all been part of, and I'm a fighter. And I'd say that what we need to do is we need to send to Congress women and like-minded men who understand the issues and will go to the front lines and fight to reverse these horrible decisions and have the experience and knowledge to make it happen. And a big part of it is electing more pro-choice Democrats so that we have the votes in the Senate, and we need to hold on to our majority in the House. We can't lose that majority. So this is a tremendously important election. Not only, one thing that I find crazy is that as they regulate a woman's body on what you can do when, they are deregulating guns. The other Supreme Court decision rolls back the protections that we had in our century-old gun law. So they are moving in the wrong direction in every direction. And then the Supreme Court decision on the environment makes it very hard for us to implement the climate change regulations and support that we need to save our climate, to save our planet. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need fighters going to Washington who understand the issues, will get on the front lines and battle, work with you, with constituencies like the Democrats abroad to reverse these terrible decisions through legislation, through executive orders, through any means that we can. I'm just getting warmed up. I've already put in 2 bills and I'm just getting warmed up. There's another problem that we have in New York. Just listen to this. They are so terrible that the abortion clinics in New York, the crisis clinics that Bush created, which are pro-life, and I have some young women, they go to them, they come to me, they're traumatized from what they experienced there. But what they do is they fly the colors of Planned Parenthood and they make it sound like they are an abortion clinic. So these young women go there and yeah, so I put in a freedom of, you must be honest in your advertising. And I put a bill once that passed, went to the Supreme Court, they shot it down. So I think the way I wrote it this time, it will pass muster in the Supreme Court. So I am ready for the fight. If I get the right to go back and work for you, I'm asking for your support. I need your support. I hope you'll get out and vote absentee today because it's important, because so many of our issues depend on it. More questions?
I think we're actually at time now, but thank you again so much for your time to join us. And I know that everybody is anticipating their absentee ballot to be emailed to them this Saturday. This Saturday is when it's going to hit inboxes, and then anybody who's getting it mailed will get it sometime in the next few weeks. But please, please, please remember to send back your ballot the moment that you get it, because mail is really delayed right now. So make sure your vote is counted by sending it back as soon as possible. Thank you again so much for your time, Congresswoman. Is there anything else you want to say before you?
I just want to say thank you to all of you. If you come to Washington, come by my office to see you, and hopefully we'll be having a hearing next year, if I get reelected, on the problems and concerns, particularly in the financial area for Americans living abroad. And we're proud of what you do, being such good ambassadors for our country, and your numbers are growing. Thank you. Have a dynamic day.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand it over to Art Shankler, who is a New York 12 voter in Serbia and is our international vice chair. Art, do you want to take it over? Oh, I can't hear you, Art. Are you there, Art? So I can see you, but I can't hear you. You're on mute.
I was trying to access the unmute button, and I
There
was
you go.
mouthing the words "unmute me," which
Okay, great.
you not a lip reader. Okay, thanks very much, Rebecca. If I can, thanks very much. I'm just trying to get. Yeah, again, thanks. As Rebecca said, I am Art Schenkler, and as she said, I'm the International Vice Chair for Democrats Abroad. And I live in Serbia, and I've been voting in New York for, I think, the last 35 years. But because of redistricting, this will be the first year I'll be voting in the New York 12. So it's my pleasure to introduce our third candidate, Suraj Patel. Just to give you a little background about him, Mr. Patel worked on both of President Obama's presidential campaigns as an associate on the White House advance team. He's an attorney, business leader, and lecturer on business ethics at New York University. After Donald Trump's election, he became a full-time organizer and helped build communities like the Arena to support a new generation of American leaders. He served as a volunteer attorney for the ACLU when Trump's Muslim ban was instituted. He's also a longtime board member of Atlas DIY, a youth immigrant legal services organization in Brooklyn that has been on the front lines of fighting back against Trump and ICE's overreach, not ISIS, but ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement organization. Mr. Patel is also on the board of Urban Upbound, an organization dedicated to breaking cycles of poverty in public housing projects in New York. And he serves as a visiting fellow at the Century Foundation, writing on progressive policy. And as mentioned, he's on the adjunct faculty at NYU's Stern School of Business, teaching business ethics. I won't touch on that comment, having gone to business school. Mr. Patel advocated for electoral reform, making the enhanced child tax credit permanent, and helped manage a pandemic-stricken hospitality business amidst foreclosures. He's lived in Manhattan for 16 years. Mr. Patel, just a reminder that you'll have 10 minutes to give an opening remark, and then we'll have questions, and you'll have 1 minute to answer the questions. And you'll be giving a warning in 10 seconds. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. So with that, I will hand it over to you now, and you have the floor. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Art, thank you so much, and Rebecca and everyone else on this to listen to the three candidates and frankly, be civically engaged even when you're living abroad. Look, I'm incredibly excited to address this group. I am one of you. I have lived abroad and I have worked abroad. In 2009, I was a summer associate at Freshfield Bruckhouse Derringer, which is a British law firm. It took me 8.5 weeks to open a bank account with NatWest in order to get paid. I was taxed twice. There are a lot of difficulties for being somebody who lives abroad or who goes back and forth. My family, for example, emigrated from India to the United States in 1968 with almost nothing in their pockets. And you know, my story is the story of New York. It's the American story, and you know, some of our best ambassadors out there amidst this turbulent world are the folks from our own country who live abroad and who do such an incredible service as ambassadors to us. But look, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background, but I want to set the stakes here. The fact of the matter is that across the world, I'm sure you're watching our country deteriorate. Liberal democracy across the world is on the attack, or is being attacked. We see it with Ukraine and Russia. We see it with misinformation and cyber warfare. We see it with kind of majoritarian institutions like the US Senate, gerrymandering, and now the Supreme Court attacking our basic human rights. Look, we may have defeated Donald Trump, but Trumpism is on the rise. And you see it on your TV scenes and you see it on your websites, and I know that you understand what's happening in our country. And, you know, the one constant has been that 1990s Democrats no longer have any answers or explanations, arguments, or messages to take on 2022 Mitch McConnell and the Republicans. That's why we need a new generation of leadership. Leadership with varied experiences, with experiences understanding cyber warfare, misinformation, social media platforms. Leadership that understands the economy and how to rebuild a business. Leadership that understands that in order to win back, Democrats need to make a new economic argument. I'm the only candidate in this race with comprehensive plans as a policy wonk on public safety, on livability, on taxation, on inflation. I was the first candidate in this country to call on President Biden to invoke the DPA when the baby formula crisis a shortage happened. Because leadership with vision is about anticipating problems that come and doing something about them. You know, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times calling for the president to remove all tariffs on baby formula. Why are we worried about tariffs? Why are we worried about baby formula from the Netherlands? What the worst case scenario is that we have very tall, happy babies. You know, and at the same time, my op-ed was published in the New York Times, and 2 days later, the president did, in fact, invoke the DPA. And a month and a half later, we learned that in June, the companies that produce baby formula in this country are producing 80% more, thanks to the ability to get raw materials faster because of the DPA. That's what activist leadership looks like. My opponents are going to talk about seniority. They're going to talk about their experience. But what good is seniority and experience if you keep losing? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of not just insanity, but also incumbency. Now, we've had 2 storied legislatures for 30 years, but the real question is, who is fundamentally better positioned right now to make a new argument for liberal New York values across the country? And I believe I am, because the experiences of my life, these are the experiences that I've had. The battles we are about to face are the ones I fought my entire life. When I was 5 years old, my father was an MTA engineer. He worked working the night shift as a union worker, coming home at 7 in the morning after fixing track. My parents and my family emigrated here. I was born here, but we slept in a 1-bedroom apartment above a bodega that we ran. 13 of us sleeping in a line: mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, brothers, cousins. I didn't sleep in my own bed until I was in ninth grade. And we used to get the newspaper in the mornings at 5 in the morning for that bodega. And it would be the New York Times. It would be in separate sections: the front page, the business section, the sports section, etc. And if you sorted it yourself as a family before you went to sell it at the store, you'd make 10 extra cents. I know the value of a dime. I don't take a dime of corporate PAC money in this race because I know the problem with the corrosive influence of corporate money in politics. We saw the culmination of that over the last 12 years. We saw the culmination of that with 3 stolen Supreme Court seats, an election, and now an incredible assault on our fundamental rights to police carbon dioxide emissions, to police guns, and worst, of course, to police women's bodies in this country. Now, it took 50 to 60 to 30 years for these rights to erode. If it takes a quarter of that time to bring them back, only one candidate on your ballot is positioned with the stamina, the energy, and the ideas to take that fight. This is a change election. The contrast could not be more clear. I respect the hell out of Representative Maloney and Jerry Nadler for the service they've done. But the problems we've been talking about continue to crop up over and over, year after year after year after year. And the only way to change that is to actually change who we vote for. And so I'm asking you, and I'd rather leave more time for questions given that you guys have a limited amount of time, and the issues that we normally talk about, for example, crime in New York, livability, affordability, the culture of no in this city, they're very important here, and that's what I normally talk about. But I know that there are different issues for you, and so I'm going to respect that and give you more time to do questions for the next 20-25 minutes rather than continue on. So thank you so much for listening, and I am incredibly excited to earn your support in the coming weeks in this election in the new New York 12.
Thank you, Suraj, if I may call you Suraj, for sharing.
Yeah.
Before I go to the first question, just remind people that if you have a question, you go to the link in the chat box, and can I ask to make sure that the link put back in the chat box for submitting the web form? And with that, I would like to introduce Stephanie Lindquist. She's also a New York 12 voter living in Belgium. Stephanie has a question about FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Go for it, Stephanie. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Great. Terrific.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. Greetings from Brussels. And it was interesting that you mentioned that you had had difficulty opening up a bank account in England, because that is exactly what I'm going to ask you about. I recently moved to Belgium from Sweden, and I set up an independent contracting company here, which requires a local bank account. I started the process of opening the bank account in February, but because of FATCA, it was not opened until a few weeks ago, which is, in other words, almost 5 months. As a result of this, I was not paid any salary from the beginning of the year until now. My bank finds it very onerous to deal with Americans, and they simply didn't want me as a client, and no bank does. Americans abroad are uniquely discriminated against outside of the US due to the expense and hassle of compliance with the US law called FATCA. Once elected, will you introduce a bill to exempt Americans abroad from FATCA reporting so we can open bank accounts in the countries we live in? Thank you.
Yes, Stephanie. So let me just say that having lived through this nightmare myself, I completely understand what you're saying. And let's also just talk about, generally speaking, taxes and tax filing. The two companies that lobby the most, H&R and Intuit, have purposefully, spent 11 to 13 million dollars lobbying the last decade to continuously make our tax filing preparation and forms more and more cumbersome and difficult. When we have in the UK where I lived, when we had a self-file system, the IRS could very easily do that. Frankly, they have the information. I don't know why I had to come up with my receipts in my forms. So overall, the problem you're talking about is global in our country, and it's because we've got an incredibly captured Congress with the influence of corporate PAC money. Now, one thing I want to let you know is that I'm the only candidate in this race that does not take a dime of corporate PAC money. That in this cycle alone, both of my opponents have taken about $1 million of corporate PAC money and several millions in their career from the very same companies they're supposed to regulate. To me, as an ethics professor, as a lawyer, as a person who worked for President Obama, I believe that creates a conflict of interest, and it puts your interest behind that of campaign contributions from people like H&R Block, Intuit, or anything else. So first off, FATCA needs to be reformed. It cannot. I understand the need to, especially in this current environment, to make sure that oligarchs and others aren't laundering money and aren't parking money and taking advantage of the U.S. system. But at the same time, we need to do away with onerous requirements on regular people. You're not an oligarch if you make $100,000 and $200,000 a year and you're living in Belgium. That's quite clear. So there could be exemptions for below certain amounts and things like that. We should be doing that. And frankly, we should have a territorial tax system in this country. It's kind of incredible that we don't have a territorial tax system when the rest of our peer OECD countries do. It's something I studied when I was at law school, and it is something that actually makes American competitiveness across the world harmed. And the latest Trump tax cut sort of moved us to some hybrid model in that vein. But again, shocker, guess who it mostly benefited? Corporations, not individual tax filers. And so I completely understand what you're saying. And yes, I would completely, be all ears to and push forward massive reform of FATCA to exempt people under certain amounts and things like that, while still preserving the right and the ability to police money laundering, terrorism, et cetera, et cetera.
I thank you very much for that answer, and thank you to Stephanie for her question. I'd now like to introduce Edgar Lopez, who's also a New York 12 voter, living in Mexico, and also Edgar is the head of our social media team. So go ahead, Edgar. Please ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Art. And hello, Suraj. It's nice meeting you. And I am very, very happy that all of you are here with us and looking abroad. One of the things I love the most about living in New York City is how the people who live there, they don't look inward like most people tend to do everywhere, but they're looking abroad. They're metropolitan people who know that there's a world out there, and that's a world where people live after living in New York many times, or from the world come to live in New York. And it is very good to know that all of you candidates are engaging with us abroad, the Americans abroad. And the question that I want to ask you is, if you are elected to the New York 12th district, you will very likely be representing the largest number of Americans abroad of any member in the House. So given this, how will you demonstrate leadership on American abroad issues?
Well, Edgar, thank you so much for your question. And, you know, this is an incredibly important constituency for especially our district, which probably has the most Americans abroad in the world. And you're speaking to one who has been one. And you're speaking to one who has direct, close family who are Americans abroad currently, and peers and friends. I went to law school at NYU. Many of my friends have been working in Paris, in London, in Singapore, in Hong Kong over the last few years. I have peers who I literally on a daily basis talk to who have my ear in terms of some of the challenges that you face abroad. Let's remember, this is New York City. This city is a beacon for people from all 193 countries who come on boats and trains and buses and planes and boats and get to America, and they get to New York City. This city, it is a shining beacon. And the representative that represents the center of it, the heart of it, ought to be reflective of the strength of the diversity and dynamism and aspiration of it. We need to make New York that beacon again, you know? And so I commit to you right here that as a person who not only has lived abroad, who has ties abroad, whose grandparents still are Americans abroad in the country of India, that this is an incredibly important constituency for me, not just because of the fact that there are voters in it in my district, but because I am uniquely positioned to understand how important it is that people from the standpoint of soft power and from our economy, that people from America feel like living abroad and representing our nation and the work you do isn't a burden, that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for both our country and for dialogue and for peace over time. Our democracy is something that, like I said at the beginning, and all liberal democracy is currently under attack across the world. And we've got to defend it right here. You know, the reason we're in this race in the first place, the reason that we're in this strange three-way race with two incumbents for the first time since 1932 is because, you know, the New York Democrats, including Congresswoman Maloney, were caught gerrymandering. You know, the New York Times reported that young and Latino voters were being cut out of this district at the behest of Representative Maloney last November on the basis of race and age, because she could not win them. And, you know, Representative Nadler handed off territory in Manhattan to those voters, to her, in order to save her reelection. Because I came within 3% of beating her 2 years ago in an election that was marred by absentee vote difficulties, 12,500 ballots that never counted. As people who, by the way, vote absentee, let me let you know that I have been at the forefront of reforming vote by mail rules and laws in order to make sure that ballots coming from abroad, coming from around the country count, despite stray marks and late and missing postmarks and things like that. So I'm a fighter for you, and I'm a fighter for democracy. There's only one consistent fighter for democracy in this race. I'm the only one that didn't gerrymander, and I don't take corporate PAC money. I think that should be really an important part of your choice here. But as people who represent this country abroad, let me try to represent you here, and let the dynamism and diversity of this city be represented.
Thank you. Thank you, Suraj.
Thanks very much, Mr. Patel. Rebecca, do we have, who's next to ask a question?
Yeah, we have Peter Fishbeck. Are you there?
Oh, okay, good. I know what he's going to ask about. Go ahead, Peter.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for being on this call. This is really, we appreciate your time. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. government vaccinated all embassy staff abroad, their local staff, as well as all active overseas military. Although the U.S. also donated many millions of vaccine doses to countries around the world, many of those countries specifically excluded foreigners, including Americans, from access to those very vaccines. The donations were defined by the State Department as being given with no strings attached, And the recommendation from the State Department to Americans living abroad was simply to return home for vaccination. This ignored the impossibility for many Americans, including many retired military veterans, to travel, whether for reasons of health or cost. And for working age people with normal jobs, which describes most Americans abroad, they are unable to take the 2 to 4 weeks needed for travel and vaccination in the States. And of course, it ignores the public health risk to the US population when Americans return home, possibly bringing new COVID variants with them. France and Japan have done this by providing vaccines for their citizens overseas and outsourcing final delivery to local hospitals. What would you do if you're elected to put the necessary pressure on the White House and the State Department to vaccinate and boost Americans abroad where they live?
Peter, I find that to be appalling and a glaring misstep by the White House and by the State Department. And let me assure you that I would do everything in my power, including, going to the White House, passing a bill saying that no American, no military American or non-military citizen living abroad should be left out of, especially if you're paying taxes in America, you should be left out of a simple life-saving vaccination. And so, Peter, let me say, like I say, I express my outrage, frankly, at the fact that you were left behind. And you should have a representative who is unafraid to say the hard truths, who is unbought or unbossed by anyone, and who isn't part of a machine that says, well, let's sweep some of these mistakes and problems under the rug because they may step on our message. You need someone who's fiercely independent, who's willing to go to bat for you as a constituent, and that's what I would do.
Thank you. Appreciate your answer.
Thank you. That's an issue that I've been following closely with Peter. Rebecca, do we have time for one more question or two, maybe? I think we started a little late on this candidate, but
yeah.
It's your fault.
Next, we have Bruce Murray. Are you there, Bruce?
Yes, I am.
Go
Thank you very much, Suraj, for joining us today. Listening to you, I decided to formulate a question and then you answered it while I was formulating it. So I'm going to modify a little bit. It seems to me that you might decide to join the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I'm chair of our Global Progressive Caucus, and we interact with the caucus quite a bit and are interested in learning what the caucus is going to do moving forward. It's likely that there will be several new members in 2022, and that they are increasingly becoming a force to reckon with in the House caucus. And as a new member among new members, what would you do to maximize the power of the Congressional Progressive Caucus to make sure that we really do make progress in the next term?
Bruce, thank you for that question. And you're correct. I would be joining the Progressive Caucus, but I will also say this. I will join a number of caucuses. And the reason is this. One of the reasons I'm running this race is very simple. We have lost the argument to the other side on a number of generational issues, from climate change to gun control, to reproductive rights, to the economy. 69% of Americans support Roe versus Wade, but 49% voted for Donald Trump. That delta of 20% is because we were not comprehensive, because we're not making a new economic argument that supports all Americans, working class and middle class, that we aren't building the middle class. We engaged in a 2010 to 2020 decade that was a lost decade because we understimulated the recovery from the financial crisis, and because we pushed austerity measures, and because we raised interest rates too fast. We cannot repeat the same mistake again, and I believe we're about to repeat the same mistake again as we all see it from the ECB and from the Fed here. We need people who understand the economy, who have started a business, who have signed both sides of the paycheck, to come in and make a new case that Democrats are good at the economy. Democrats are good at making sure we create jobs and elevate incomes, and that's what we need to be doing. And so one piece that I'm going to leave this question with is that when I worked for that 2008 Obama campaign, I was still in law school before I graduated law school, and we had Democratic senators from Missouri, from Kansas, from Indiana, from North Dakota, from Alaska, 2 from Ohio, 2 from Wisconsin. I mean, these are some incredible, Arkansas. I mean, these are some incredible places that you would never think today would be unfathomable to elect a Democrat. And The reason is because we stopped believing in the power of persuasion. My campaign is premised 100% on the idea that we have to return to persuasion, that because we disagree with somebody on one thing doesn't mean that they're irredeemable on everything. That's how we win these rights back. And I don't believe that the incumbents any longer have that muscle memory in them to do that kind of work, to go back out there and make a new case, a new argument, which is why I started this with the same way I'm going to end it, which is change is necessary. I mean, you have to be living under a rock to believe that things are going well. And the question is, how could you possibly affect change if you're not willing to vote for it yourself? How could we expect other people to? And that's this candidacy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patel. By the way, it's Suraj, I believe.
Yeah,
Bruce?
Suraj, yeah.
Yeah, I looked that up before the call. And Rebecca, do you have time for another question if we've got one?
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
We have Lizette from a New York 12 voter in Canada. Lizette, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Art. It's great to see all of you. And Professor Patel, welcome and greetings from Canada. I am actually from the Upper West Side, and I have a question from the Democrats Abroad Global Disability Caucus. If you are elected to represent New York 12th Congressional District, what is your plan to protect the Americans with Disabilities Act and to reinforce, what is your plan to reinforce the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act?
So that's a fantastic question. And I will say that I am more than terrified with this activist Supreme Court eviscerating, the Commerce Clause and frankly, any single national regulation that protects vulnerable Americans. And so first thing we need to do is make sure that we expand the Supreme Court and make it an actual serious policy position of the Democratic Party, which needs to take after Lincoln and FDR and others and say that this court is no longer representative of the people. 57 million Americans live with disability. It is appalling that only 33% of our own subways in New York City are ADA compliant. And so not only do I support the ADA and would strengthen it, but I actually believe in expanding disability rights to make sure that things like, in our district, hailing on demand, Uber and Lyft and things like that are covered under the ADA and make that ADA compliant. I also believe in extending the disability tax credit to get more, the unemployment rate for disabled individuals in America, in New York City at least, is about 1.5 times that of able-bodied Americans. And so I think that these are the things that I'd be focused on, is the making sure that when we protect the rights we already have, but to expand those and create true economic, opportunity.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you again for joining us today. I would just mention, I think you're quite right that the recent Supreme Court ruling on the EPA puts all kinds of administrative regulations at risk. So we really need to.
I worry they touch Chevron next, and that would be the whole Pandora's box.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks again for joining us today, Mr. Patel, and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you very much.
Encourage you to please keep letting New Yorkers abroad, including, I guess, your grandparents, if I heard correctly, know the importance of their vote. So
I will.
Thank you again. And thank you to all the candidates for participating. To everyone attending, please remember to request your absentee ballot at votefromabroad.org, which is the message on my mug, if you can see it. And votefromabroad.org, I'll say it one more time. And call your friends and family and make sure that if they're overseas, make sure that they're voting. If they're in the US, make sure they go to iwillvote.org iwillvote.com to register to vote. It's really important to get every voter out this year. As people have said, we need to keep reminding ourselves that we are the majority on all of these issues that are of importance to Americans. We are the majority. We just have to get out and vote that way. So you can also find a list of the written answers from all the candidates on Americans Abroad issues on our website. I think, is it going back into the chat box one more time? So people could look at that. And of course, I would also suggest that if you want to multiply your vote beyond calling other people, the best way is to donate to Democrats Abroad. Go to votefromabroad.org/donate. If somebody can put that in the chat box, I'd appreciate it. So again, thank you to everyone for attending. Yep.
Do you mean democratsabroad.org/donate?
Yeah, what did I say?
Vote
Oh,
from
vote from
abroad.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. I wrote it down wrong. Sorry. Thank you, Rebecca. Democratsabroad.org/donate. I don't know where you get to if you put votefromabroad.org/donate. Anyway, thanks again to everyone for attending. Please get out and vote. When the video is available, we will email it to you and to other people living in the district, as well as, so please forward it on to friends and family. It's been a very interesting discussion about issues that are important, not only to Americans abroad, but to all Americans. So turning out the vote in New York's 12th district, first time for me in that district. So please, thank you again to Rebecca and Vanessa Moore in Singapore and others who've been involved in setting up this candidate session.